Hi everyone, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie, and for those of you who are new to this channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until we reach zero. And I've just taken a little bit of a break from BookTube because I have been away and traveling. So I thought I would use this video on my return to talk a little bit about the bookish things that I did while I was in China and Korea. So I was away for a total of 3 weeks, and I spent 2 of those weeks in China visiting some family, but also doing some hiking and enjoying the spring season over there. It was also cherry blossom season while I was there, so it was absolutely stunning. And after that, I went to South Korea, where I spent about a week in Seoul and also in a city called Jeonju, which was so picturesque. And of course, while I was in both of these places, I visited some bookshops and I visited some libraries. So I thought I'd take you through some of the places that I went to and the footage that I took at these bookshops. And it's really interesting sometimes to compare bookshop culture between countries. I feel like in the West, particularly more so in Europe than maybe Australia, where we tend to have more book chains or independent chains. But in Europe, I certainly find that a lot of the bookshops tend to be, or the best bookshops tend to be, these pokey, cozy little places like Shakespeare and Company, where there's that kind of secondhand, almost dusty vibes to a bookshop. People tend to like those kind of cozy, snug places. Whereas I find in Asia, because a lot of bookshops are in malls, they tend to go for really grand designs that make you feel palatial as you enter. And the aesthetic is far more kind of Japan-y, that strange East meets West minimalism kind of style. And so it's really interesting to compare those styles. The other thing that I noticed a lot about both bookshops in China and in South Korea is that they seem to rely on their cafe within the bookshop and also on their stationery lines a lot for revenue. And that could be because, there's a lot more kind of journaling, I feel like, that goes on in particularly in kind of East Asian communities where people tend to journal and scrapbook, and they use things like washi tape and they do the kind of your bullet journaling stuff a lot more. So I find a lot of the bookshops are selling kind of their merch products rather than books a lot more. But having said that, I went to some spectacular bookshops on this trip, so let me take you through some of them.
So I'm here in the beautiful city of Nanjing, formerly the capital of China, and this is this historic area, and this is the bookshop in question. It is built in the middle of a roundabout, which is kind of an architectural detail that is very curious. And the bookshop is called Librairie Avant. Don't ask me why, it's in French, but this is one of the original chains of Nanjing City and its indie bookstore scene. And right by the door they have all of their best-selling books, which are some history books about the city of Nanjing and some poetry, as well as a copy of Lincoln Highway. Weird. And the most unique thing about this bookstore is the fact that it is entirely circular. All of the bookshelves are molded around this roundabout format, and it's also in one of the few areas in China where there's some genuine Art Deco architecture. So I was really enjoying just the vibes. And here's the area around the bookstore, which are full of old mansions and embassy buildings, which are now all turned into hotels. It's a period of Chinese history that isn't very well remembered, because most of these are Western style buildings. And of course, arriving in Nanjing in spring, I had to go and check out the cherry blossoms. Next up, we have the OG bookstore for the Avant chain. This is the first bookstore they ever opened, and they opened it inside an air raid shelter. So as I mentioned, Nanjing was formerly the capital of China, so it was heavily bombed during the Second World War, and as a result, a lot of these old air raid shelters became disused, and the very clever founders of this bookstore decided to open up a bookstore inside, and now it's become such an attraction. I love seeing what kinds of translated fiction there is available in China, because sometimes it can be really surprising. I wouldn't have expected Milan Kundera to have such a big following in China, but here we are, so many of his books are translated. And I was so tempted by these translated versions of Virginia Woolf novels. Virginia Woolf is bizarrely popular in China, and there was a new edition of her books released just last year. And one of the things I find truly amazing about this bookstore is just how large it is. It just goes on and on and on and on, and everywhere you look there are people reading and enjoying themselves, or drinking coffee, or buying merchandise. And the bookshop is also famous for having this wall of postcards that people write to themselves or to their friends, and I read through some of them and they are oddly touching. The last bookish thing I did while I was in China was actually during a hike that I took along this beautiful track by this old irrigation system. And on the other side of the track are these beautiful villages and a stream in the mountains. And imagine my surprise when I came across this little library in the middle of a Chinese village. The library actually functions as both a library, a calligraphy center, and also a cafe. The barista told me that I had to go upstairs and check out what they've done with it, and I'm so glad I did. As I walked upstairs, this was what I saw. And can we have a round of applause for this amazing lotus pendant light, please? It is so gorgeous. And as I said, you can borrow any of these books and return them in the city. And I can totally imagine myself sitting here, drinking my green tea, reading my library book, and looking out the window at that view. And after an abrupt change of scenery, we were in South Korea. This is Kyobo bookstore in the middle of Seoul, and it is one of the largest bookstores, I believe, in Seoul. And as with any good Asian bookstores, their stationery section was absolutely amazing. And happily, they actually have a decent selection of English language books. Being in Korea, they had a special shelf for all of their Korean novelists, and I spent a long time here trying to pick out what book I was going to bring back as a souvenir from Korea. And no trip to Seoul is complete without a visit to the now Instagram famous Starfield Library. This is a library located in a shopping mall, and as you can see, it is quite architecturally spectacular. And I've often wondered, but can now confirm, that the top shelves in this library are mostly decorational, but the bottom ones are definitely in use, and there were lots of people sitting around reading.
So those are the bookshops and libraries that I visited on this trip. What did you think about them? Were they what you expected from bookshops and libraries in China and in Korea? I personally loved them. I thought they were really inspiring, both in terms of their design, but also in terms of their business models, because I find because these bookshops are trying to rely a lot more on different sources of income in terms of books, stationery, in terms of their cafe businesses, and just in terms of their general vibes, getting people through the door, having them stay and read a book and drink a cup of coffee. I find that kind of a really inspiring way for bookshops to survive in this world where people are probably not buying books in the way that they used to. I think for bookshops to really make themselves commercially viable, they need to offer both the product and the experience these days, because otherwise people just go on Amazon for the product. It's the experience of going to a bookshop and lingering around and flicking through books that has people still kind of wanting to go to these spaces. So I find it really inspiring to see these bookshops in Asia try out different models or try to kind of rely on more than one source of income. So while I was there, I did buy a few books. And for those of you who are new to this channel, I'm not supposed to be buying books until I finish all of the unread books on my bookshelf. But there are two exceptions that are kind of relevant for present purposes. The first is that I'm allowed to buy books when I travel, and that's because I really love traveling, and one of my favorite souvenirs to buy while I'm traveling is a book. I love going to local bookshops and checking out local authors and what they're publishing and picking up books that I otherwise probably would not have come across just in Australia. So while I was in Korea, I bought two books by local authors. The first one is a book called Black Flower by Young-ha Kim. So this book I had not heard of before I went to Korea, and when I saw it in a bookshop and I picked it up and read the blurb, I decided that I must have it because the blurb just sounded too fantastic. It almost sounds a little bit, or reminds me a little bit of Pachinko. I'll just read you quickly the blurb. In 1904, facing war and the loss of their nation, more than 1,000 Koreans leave their home for the promised land in unknown Mexico. After a long sea voyage, these emigrants, thieves and royals, priests and soldiers, orphans and entire families, discover that they have been sold into indentured servitude. Aboard the ship, the orphan Il-jong fell in love with a nobleman's daughter. Separated when the hacendados claimed their laborers, he vows to find her. Then after years of working in the punishing heat of the henequen fields, the Koreans are caught in the midst of a Mexican revolution. A tale of star-crossed love, political turmoil, and the dangers of seeking freedom in a new world, Black Flower is an epic story based on a little-known moment in history. I just think that sounds like such a fascinating premise for a book. So once I read the blurb, I had to get this book. The second book I got is actually a work of Korean literature that I had heard of, which is Kim Ji-young, born in 1982, by the author Cho Nam-ju. And as I understand, the name Kim Ji-young is kind of like Mary. It's the standard stand-in name for a generic Korean woman. And this book is supposed to be quite a feminist story about the life of a South Korean woman. So I'll just read you the inside cover. Kim Ji-young, born 1982, is a South Korean sensation that has got the whole world talking. The life story of one young woman born at the end of the 20th century raises questions about endemic misogyny and institutional oppression that are relevant to us all. Riveting, original, and uncompromising, this is the most important book to have emerged from South Korea since Han Kang's The Vegetarian. So this one I had heard of, so I'm looking forward to reading it, and it's also quite short, which is very nice for someone who is currently in the middle of Les Miserables still. I'm looking forward to a change of pace once I've finished that monster of a book. So those are the two books that I got while I was in Korea. In addition to being allowed to buy books while I travel, there is another exception to the book buy and ban, and that is that I'm allowed to buy books in foreign languages. So I read in 3 languages. I read in English, which probably makes up for about 90% of the books I read. And then every year I do try to read one book at least in Chinese and one book at least in French. So while I was in China, I thought I would take advantage of my second exception, which is that I'm allowed to buy books in foreign languages and buy some Chinese books. The main reason why I needed to buy some Chinese books is that last year I had read the first book of the 3 Body Problem trilogy. I discovered at the end of the first book that the story was actually just starting. So I'm kind of eager to get on with the 3 Body Problem and the remaining 2 books in the trilogy, particularly now that the Netflix show is out. So I'm kind of like holding off from watching the Netflix series until I've read the books. So while I was in China, I did get the second book in, I think these are called Remembrance of Earth's Past in English. So the second book in the trilogy is called Dark Forest. So this follows on from the 3 Body Problem. And then the final book in this trilogy, I think it's the English language translation is Death's End, but I'm reading it in the original Chinese because actually the language isn't particularly difficult and my level of proficiency is more than sufficient to read these. So I hadn't quite realized that since the last time I've been there that the publisher of these books had completely changed the cover and the edition because of the popularity of the book. So I'm a little bit annoyed because these 2 editions don't quite match with my first book that I got, but I'm happy that I got these other ones, and I'm hoping to get through at least Dark Forest this year so I can keep working my way through this series. So there you have it. We have 2 books in English of translated Korean literature. We have Kim Ji-yeon, born 1982, and Black Flower. And then we've got 2 books in original Chinese, following on from the 3 Body Problem in the same trilogy. So that's my little book haul. Book hauls are very rare on this channel, so I feel like this is brand new content for me. Other than this, I also will be coming back with, hopefully, a recap of everything that I read, including finishing off Les Miserables. So wish me luck on that. I'm almost at the end of that book.